Yes, good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about the other executive order, not the one that everybody's been hearing about, the one that has to do with the visas and doing away with visas, but there's another one that I think will have a greater impact here in Rhode Island and across the country. And excuse me. That's the executive order that changes the priorities for enforcement of actions with immigration. That one affects people who are here already. The 30 or 40,000 undocumented, plus many people who are here with lawful status, that is green card holders. Reverend Anderson also asked me to touch upon legal issues, and I assume by that you mean legal issues that have to do with setting up a sanctuary environment. There's not really a lot that I can say about that. I don't think there are many legal issues, such as liability issues, that can come up. If that bill that is pending at the State House does pass, that might create some issues because there's this notion of aiding and abetting or harboring someone who might be in the country illegally and making that a criminal activity. So we need to keep an eye on that. And this is a very fluid situation in terms of, there's going to be some actions like the sanctuary movement, and then there's going to be some actions against that by the administration and by states to try to deter. We've already seen the whole argument with our president saying that he's going to withhold funding of cities and states that joined the sanctuary movement. I've talked to a number of lawyers across the country. I've been researching this issue, and it doesn't appear that the president has any authority to withhold funding from cities and towns that are deemed, and I throw the quotes up there, sanctuary cities, because there is no real definition of what a sanctuary city is. We know that the concept, the general concept is that the sanctuary movement participants don't help ICE and the Department of Homeland Security to carry out their federal functions in terms of deporting and rounding up people. And there's nothing in the law that compels local cities and towns, police departments, sheriffs, or whatever law enforcement agency there might be to carry out these federal functions. And in fact, the good reasoning behind not cooperating with ICE is that it harms the police relation with the communities. And we've already, we've seen many of the police chiefs across the country raise those concerns. So when you have a victim of a crime, you don't want the victim of the crime not to report the crime in fear that the police might turn her into ICE for deportation. When we have someone who witnesses criminal activity, we don't want that person not to report that. So there's many good law enforcement reasons for local enforcement not to work hand in hand with ICE. But other than that, there's really nothing that the law enforcement agencies are doing to prevent ICE from doing their job. So, for example, even if Providence is a sanctuary city, that doesn't mean that ICE cannot, come on our streets and round up people, like we saw during the Carcieri administration, where ICE was going into supermarkets, they were going into soccer fields and detaining people and asking them for papers. So that's still a real reality, even with the sanctuary movement. In terms of churches being sanctuaries, I mean, if the church is going to have individuals living in the church, for example, as we saw in the 80s with Central Americans that were, that ICE was trying to deport, there's really nothing that ICE can do to come in here and drag someone out of a church. In fact, ICE has a policy. There's a policy memo. I haven't seen it, but I hear that it's out there, that says that ICE won't go into churches, hospitals, or schools to do an enforcement action. So, assuming that that's correct and that doesn't change, I don't see ICE coming in here. Plus, or to any church for that matter. One of the things that I think it's important, if you're going to be a sanctuary site, I think you need to know what the different people who you are protecting, what their problems might be with the government. For example, is someone a permanent resident? Is someone an undocumented person who came in across the border, or is it someone that came in with a visa and overstayed their visa? You might also want to know if the person has any kind of criminal history. The new executive order changes the enforcement priorities. Under President Obama, the enforcement priorities dealt mostly with criminal aliens, as they were called. And they were serious criminal aliens, not just someone who gets pulled over for driving without a license. With the new enforcement priorities, anybody can get picked up if they don't have legal status, even if they haven't been convicted of a crime. I think that's very important. It's a significant departure from the past. Because now what we're seeing is that if ICE finds someone that is in the courthouse, for example, responding to a complaint, that is sufficient for ICE to detain that person and put them in the process. You may know that in the past, the way ICE has worked is that when someone was arrested, their fingerprint, they were fingerprinted. And those fingerprints went to the FBI and to ICE. And then ICE would look and see, do we want this person or not? If the person had a deportation order, for example, they were a high priority, and ICE might call the police department or fax them what's called a detainer, which says you got to hold this person for 48 hours. Now, interestingly enough, even though the detainer says, hold this person for 48 hours, the police department is under no obligation to honor that detainer. If there isn't a judicial warrant, there's no reason for the police department to hold. But what happened was that a lot of police departments did agree to that level of cooperation so that they would hold, particularly when there was a couple of situations where police departments would release someone who was a serious felon and they recommitted a crime, and then the police department got a black eye for releasing this person rather than holding them for ICE. So there are many legal issues that come up with the people that you're trying to serve, and I think it's important that you identify legal services that are out there. The International Institute has people on board that can help in this capacity. Roger Williams Law School, and my wife, who is the clinic director, is here with me tonight. She's the immigration clinic director at the law school, and they can go out and do a Know Your Rights presentation to anyone that you may identify, or to groups that want to provide assistance. So Roger Williams University is a good source, the International Institute, and then there are a number of lawyers that will do this. If you ask them, they will do this without charging. So you know, developing that network of people is going to be very important, particularly if enforcement actions start to occur, and if someone falls in that wide net that they're going to cast, you need to be ready to provide some legal representation. It's not just, you know, we're going to keep you in the church basement or in the church sanctuary or wherever it may be. You ultimately need to help the person resolve their legal problems. And many times there are ways to resolve the problems. There is still some forms of relief available in terms of fighting deportation and being able to stay in this country. You just have to know what those are and how to apply. So I think I'm going over my 10 minutes. So
okay, just see if a couple questions.
Sure. Are there any questions that I can...
Roberto, can you repeat the questions to them? Could you repeat the questions to them? Because back here we couldn't hear the questions themselves earlier.
I'm not sure I understand what
Repeat the questions so that it's on the mic.
Oh, sure. Okay, so is there a question? Let me go here first.
Roberto, do you know who's sponsoring that bill?
I do not, but I can tell you that every year there's a number of bills that are anti-immigrant bills that just routinely come up. There's a number of legislators.
Representative Phillips.
Who is it, please?
Representative Phillips from Socket, Cumberland is one of them. Is
Corvese.
O'Brien.
Nardillo is another one that has been
And
anti.
the bill number for when you call your representative, the bill number is 5093.
Thank you. Everybody heard that, right?
Yeah.
By the way, there's also
Excuse
some...
me, is that a House bill?
That's the House bill.
It's a House bill.
Repeat
Yeah.
the numbers, please.
5093.
You want to repeat the number one more
Sure,
time?
yeah. Everybody please call specifically Representative Corvese. He and I have a wonderful relationship. And I'm sorry if you live in North Providence. I apologize. But the bill is House Bill 5093. It is specifically focused on state and public officials. So if you are a government paid official by a state or a town, you are required by law to turn in anybody who is here illegally. So it doesn't mean clergy or members of church unless you are employed by the state. However, there's a provision in the bill as it stands right now that essentially says if anybody knows of anybody else that is aiding and abetting in the holding or knows of anybody who is here illegally, then they are legally bound to report that information to the local sheriff department.
Someone constitutional to me, but...
Yeah, right.
There's also some pro-immigrant bills. One of them is driver's licenses. You know, as a lawyer, what I see most common is that people get stopped and they don't have a driver's license because they don't have a social security number, because they don't have a green card or some legal paper from immigration saying that they can be here. So if you can't get a driver's license, you are in a particularly precarious position, and that's how it all starts, because you get picked up, you get arrested, you get fingerprinted, and then ICE quickly sees that, and they may be waiting for you at your court hearing.
One other point to that, those are the other bills. There are other bills that are on the agenda this year that specifically are related to that. If anybody gets picked up, it'll be, any sheriff's department will be legally bound to immediately contact ICE and start deportation procedures immediately.
So it used to be that they used to contact ICE, and ICE wouldn't even bother coming unless they saw it was a priority case, but now that may all change. By the way, one of the executive order calls for $10,000 new ICE agents and 5,000 new Border Patrol agents. So with that kind of augmentation of the Department of Homeland Security, you can certainly expect to see more enforcement actions.
Good. I'm going to move us along. If there's one more question, this gentleman did have his hand up.
Yes.
so-
I'm curious how you define church physically. For instance, here we have two buildings. This is a sanctuary, that's another building, or a clergy's residence that's attached to a church congregation, but not necessarily physically attached to the sanctuary. You know, can you clarify what this physical definition of sanctuary in the church means, and so we understand?
I'm afraid that I can't. I really don't know, but I would just guess that the entire church property, the entire premises would be considered to be part of the church. But I don't hold me to that.
We'll do some work on that. I'm sure that's a question that folks have asked. And that, that's a great question to thank you so much, Roberto.
Sure.
Thank you.